He said, I'm going to give you a year. And if you can find a way to make a living at this. And so Dad was on a mission. And he was had some friends that helped him find a market for his paintings. And one of the first markets he found was actually at a resort in Vail. He hung some of these kind of paintings, and they sold off in a week. And I'm like, huh, okay, people like to buy this. And so then he was actually allowed. He was given the best offer he had for one of his paintings. It was a DU dinner in Denver. Ducks Unlimited started in the 30s, but by the 60s it was a really big thing. And so he was offered a steak dinner and all the drinks he could drink for painting. And he went up to Denver, and that evening his painting in that auction sold for $600. And that was in 67, 68, I believe. And that's $4,000 in today's money. And so he got stone cold drunk that night and said, I found my market. And because what they told him was just paint a painting of some ducks. Lots of people are buying sporting art. And he was still trying to, he was working on still lifes and landscapes, and he was trying to put some paintings, but he did a painting much like this one, and it sold that night. And he came home and said, honey, I found my market. He's an economics man, right? So he knew he had to find a market to buy his paintings. So he started contacting galleries around the country, and there was 2 galleries he originally got in touch with, and the first one was in Vermont. And they started buying paintings. They said, send us paintings and we'll pay you for them. So they loaded up everything they had, sold it all. It was Herb and Sandy, 2 kids, my brother and I, and a dog. And bought a camper on the back of a pickup truck and started heading across the country to Vermont. Halfway across the country, the checks stopped coming. And what happened was there was some family emergencies and catastrophes, and that particular gallery went out of business. And now they're stuck halfway across the country, don't own anything except the camper on the back of a truck. And this is in the summer of 1970. And so Dad was visiting family in Oklahoma, and one of the other galleries he'd been in touch with was Meredith Long in Houston. And so he took a hard right turn and headed down to Houston and walked in and showed Meredith this type of work. And Meredith did something that I believe really changed Texas art back in that generation. Is what he would do is when he found a talented artist that he wanted to sponsor, he said, anything you paint, I'll buy. And then I'll take the risk of selling it. And so he allowed Herb and Booth, Barnes, Cowan, all those were commissioned artists under Meredith. He allowed them to have a steady income. Imagine artists today, they don't have that. And so Meredith, he was backed by his wife's money, and he had a vision, and so he had the finances to be able to do it, and was able to allow these artists to make a life out of being sporting artists down here in the Texas coast. And the week before Dad drove into Meredith's gallery, this was the summer of 1970, and Dad said, Mr. Long, thank you for taking me on. I really probably shouldn't live in Houston. I need to gather, material for the Texas coast. Where should I live? And Meredith said, oh, I've got this beautiful gallery on 62 Nassau. You need to go down to Rockport. And Dad had been reading the newspaper, and he said, I hate to tell you this, Mr. Long, but Rockport's gone. Because Hurricane Celia had hit the week before. And Meredith said, don't worry, they'll rebuild. And so they loaded up and headed down to Rockport, and this is where we first lived. There's the truck and the camper, and this is on 35 Flamingo Street on Key Allegro. And this is my brother and I. Peter got a bike that Christmas, and I got a little Daisy Rider BB gun. and we're running all around Key Allegro, and that's us riding out in boats. I remember the first boat Dad got, where we went out of Lake Lights and we're headed across. And remember when the southeast breeze is blowing, you're going right into those waves, right? Just bang, bang, and like, Dad, stop. And he slowed the boat down, and he's like, what's the matter? He's like, we're in Rockport, we must be hitting rocks. Because we were just banging on those waves. We're running up down the beach here all the time. A funny story, Peter was actually very good at directing directions and had spent a lot of time. I was a little bit younger and had spent more time out hunting with Dad in the first year we were here. And the school bus picked us up on the corner of Flamingo and Bayshore. And there used to be a vacant lot there, and that's where we were waiting for the school bus one cold December morning. And we're sitting there and we're hiding up in the oleander bush actually, and there's not that many kids out on Key Allegro at the time. And so we were one of the only stops, and the bus comes along, and we hear this behind us. I'm like, what is that noise? And this tiny little skiff comes up and parks on the beach out of the fog behind us, and we turn, and all these guys start loading down the dogs and guns and decoys and gear, and they're looking around, and we're sitting there getting ready to get on our school bus, and we're like, what are we? And Peter says, well, are you guys looking for something? Are y'all lost? It's like, where are we? It's like, you're in Key Allegro. And they all start arguing with each other. I told you we took the wrong way. And they're like, where were you headed? And I was like, we were going to the north end of St. Joe. We came out of St. Charles. Like, I don't know what happened, man, but somewhere in the middle of the bay, you went right instead of left. And so Peter actually tells us, like, if you get back in your boat, get on the compass heading east northeast, you'll probably end up in the right place. And he does that all lit back up, and back off into the fog. There you go. We spent a lot of fun growing up here on the coast. This is actually the first airboat we had. Nothing like the big monsters they have today. There was actually a Corvair engine on the skiff. This mom and dad, hunting together, of course. And this is Kate Betts actually sent me this picture of a Rockport pilot article about her coming into town. And so he started meeting the other artists in the community, and Ben Koshin was one of them. And they really started to all become friends. And Sam Caldwell wrote a wonderful book called Gulf Tides, Change of Tides. And one of the funny stories that was told about her early on is that in that airboat, my brother and I, right about that age, one day we were hunting over there on the outside of Treasure Island, outside Estes Flats, and the norther came in that day and blew all the water out. And so the airboat was stuck more than 100 feet away from the water. And we're like, we can't move it, because it's not the big strong ones like they have today that can go across dry ground. And so we were stuck. And all we had was a flashlight, and we had our gear and stuff, so we load all that back up in the boat, and we start walking. And we walk all the way around Treasure Island, through all those cuts, get all soaking wet, because Big Bayou and Little Bayou, they're deep. And so we get all soaking wet, and we end up finally over there across from Cove Harbor in the middle of the night. And and Dad's thinking, I just killed my boys, Sadie's gonna kill me, And so he ends up across Cove Harbor with his flashlight, using his best Boy Scout skills, SOS, SOS. And he's flashing to the harbor over there, and sure enough, there's one big boat captain finally sees us. I don't know how late it was. He finally sees us, and he gets one of those big oil service rigs that go out in the Gulf and was servicing the oil derricks out there. And he comes up and comes out of the intercoastal and pulls the bow way up on that beach right across from Cove Harbor. And we're sitting there, and the bow of the boat's like 30 feet ahead. We're like, hi, how do we get up? So it took us forever to get from the up into the boat, because we couldn't get out there. And so that story went around town a lot. And Ben Koshin actually did this cartoon article that was published in the paper, and one of many award-winning illustrations by Ben Koshin. This stars Herb Booth and his sons, and there's Dad with his little flashlight, and Peter and I with a dog, and we're stuck and everything. And this is in Sam Caldwell's book, actually. It's a great little story. But the artists in the community, they were all friends. Steve, this is you, here with Kent, Dad catching fish. We actually had those two fish actually framed in our house still today that Diana Bowman actually did one of her fish prints with. That was the day, and those are the only two fish caught that day, by the way. And so Dad was really pleased, because he usually did not catch anybody. And he actually caught those two fish, so he was having a good time with that. That's Ken Holbert there. Of course, James Fox, not the artist, but James, very famous in town, actually saved Booth and Barnes one day when they were capsized out in the bay one day, and Cowan's son and my older brother almost died that day. Very important in our life. Did a lot of time at the DU dinners and the banquets and the like, And so one of this picture here is actually for several years in the auctions, it was a little bit of a competition of whose painting was going to sell more in the auctions. And so to make it a little more fun out of it, they auctioned off a dinner hosted by the artists. And so they would dress up in their black ties and they would host these dinners. And then it became a competition of what's going to sell more, the hosted dinners or the paintings? Well, for several years, the hosted dinners sold more. And because they were all characters. They were a lot of fun. And of course, we all grew up together. And Dad actually enjoyed painting paintings of them. This is actually a painting, a little hard to see, but this is one day when Cowan and Barnes were talking, and they were out fishing under the lights, and they were catching trout. And Dad said, you know, it'd be fun to do a painting of fishing under the lights. And they're like, oh, no, you can't do that. You know, there's no light. You got to do a sky. He was like, no, I think I can do it. And so under a bet, he actually painted this painting, and that's Cowan, that's Barnes, that's Dad back in the background there fishing under the lights. And it's called Hog Heaven. It's one of Dad's more famous paintings. And this is called Painter Surf, and that's Booth, Cowan, or Barnes, Cowan, and Booth over here fishing. And then that's Jack, of course, fishing on the shore. So they painted paintings of each other a lot. They were all good friends here. Oh, I did the wrong button. Early on in Rockport's history, of course, was the Art Center. The Rockport Art Center started in '68. We moved here in '70. And for the first several years, the whole focus was to build an art center, right? And I remember, you know, weeks and weeks with Sandy hanging out in the Still Sales Gallery, lining up where all the artists were going to be in their tents and everything. And then we'd go out and set up on the fairgrounds out there. And for years, the money from the art festival was to build an art center. And of course, they ended up getting the O'Connor House and moving out there where the Navigation District is. And some of the early shows, these were a couple of the brochures from some of the early shows were Booth and Oldberg, and then Booth and Claude Felder, who lived here for a little while. He also came from Colorado. You know, one of the early art festival posters. It was a very important part of contributing and investing in the community that did. You know, another thing that the artists of this community, Steve and many others, invested a tremendous amount was into the conservation organizations, right? And this is actually a nice piece that Kay Betts did. It was recently published. It's a photograph of Dad and Cowan, Caldwell, and Barnes all receiving fishing poles from the Save the Cedar Bayou initiative that they did. And this fishing pole, this fly rod that Dad has here, it'll come up in a bit of the story here in a minute. And Dad did this painting when GCCA was converting over to CCA and was joining the rest of the CCA organization. He did this poster, his catch and release, putting fish back in the picture, and the man's hand is putting the water, you know, the fish back in the bay, and catch and release became a thing down here on the Texas coast. These are a whole series of Lifetime Achievement Awards that Dad won over the years through Ducks Unlimited and CCA, National Turkey Federation, and all kinds of wildlife organizations all around the country. Fun little story over here, when GCCA was first getting started, they also did, you know, give back to the community events. And one of the programs that they did was a little fishing tournament where we would take underprivileged kids to foster homes and take them fishing. And so one of our first fishing trips, Dad and I, we got these two young boys, and we headed down, that's me in the picture on the right, and we headed down to Laguna Madre, down there where Laguna and Revere Bay and Baffin Bay all kind of come together, and we're fishing over the rocks. And we're out, and that's the middle of nowhere if you've ever been there. It's, you know, the Kennedy Ranch on the left, the King Ranch on the right, and there's no buildings, right? And these little boys, you know, they were inner city kids that had never been out in a remote area like that. We're catching fish, and we had one little stall, and this youngest boy, he actually took a moment and he looked around and he goes, wait a minute, where's the nearest McDonald's? And that was his orientation to society. He's like, if I can't see a McDonald's, I must be lost. They had a great day that day, and Dad did all kinds of things like that, where, you know, he worked with the local artists and local community through the conservation programs. One of the interesting things that Dad did is he continued to want to get better, and early in his career, he actually asked Perry Bass if he could ride in one of their helicopters out in St. Joe. And Mr. Bass was like, I guess. You know, this is Herb Booth asking, I guess I'll let him, you know, crazy artist, what does he want to ride in a helicopter for? And so Dad goes up in one of those little bubble helicopters that they use to do surveys and herd cattle and things like that. And he went up in that little bubble helicopter, and his art changed ever since, because he finally saw everything from a bird's eye view. He'd never seen that before, you know. From an airplane, it's real high, right? But from a real slow-moving helicopter, everything changed for him. And so he did the Texas duck stamp from a bird's eye view. He did the Rockport Seafair poster from a bird's eye view. This is one of his more famous paintings. This is another famous painting, his Late Start, from a bird's eye view. And I'm no authority in it, but I don't remember seeing any other Texas sporting art from a bird's eye view before Dad started doing it. It was one of the earliest ones taking that initiative. So I'm just going to show you guys a little bit of the progression of his art along the way too. When he first got here, he did a lot of Texas sporting scenes that were just classic. You know, this is Eagle Lake Prairie, hunting geese, right? This is Baffin Bay, one of the cabins down there. This is hunting over ducks over St. Joe. This is hunting turkeys up in the hill country. But you notice one thing about all these paintings is that the people are interesting but not focused, right? It was a lot more about the scene. Well, what ended up maturing or changing over time was that a lot of his customers said, hey, look, I'd like a painting. I'd like to commission a painting from you. I kind of wanted me and my boys or me and my dad on our place doing our thing. And so his commissions transitioned over time to become family heirlooms, almost like capturing a scene of a family out doing their thing on their place. And so his paintings became more like this, where, you know, you're hunting on a Texas scene, and these are all, you know, these guys live out in Key Allegra. He has a house in Key Allegra, hunting with German Shorthairs, my personal favorite. You know, there's a family that fishes over there. There's Rock Fence Lake and their favorite little fishing spot, right? The favorite dove spot, and all these people are recognizable with their dogs. This is an interesting commission too. This is actually Johnson's Wharf. In the 1850s, 1860s, that was the post office for the Texas coast. And these are the schooners. And Jackie Shaw, her family is she's actually a descendant of the Captain Johnson. And she commissioned this painting from Dad. And this two-story building back here, that was actually one of the lodge houses for the postmasters and the people that were traveling up down the Texas coast. So Dad did all kinds of commissioned paintings for specific scenes, and it's another way that his art changed and matured over the years. Another thing where the community invested in Dad, and he tried to give that back, is one of the early directors of the Art Center, Jake Elliott, introduced Dad to a professor. Dad wanted to learn how to do etchings. He was a student of the craft, and you know, Bishop and all the old classics and all their etchings, and Dad didn't know how to do it. And so he asked around, and Jake introduced him to the professor over at CCSU at the time, Greg Roeder. I think I'm saying it wrong, but R-E-U-T-E-R, was a professor over at CCSU. They have a great art program over there, and he taught etchings. And so Dad went over and took a class, and he said, you know, how do you do that? And he learned the process of laying wax over a piece of stone or a piece of metal, and then scratching through that wax the lower part, the furthest dimension of a three-dimensional image, and then layering chemicals, acid, that wouldn't eat through the wax, but would eat into the actually the metal or the stone. Then you wipe that paraffin off, and you put another layer of wax on, and you do the next layer up, and then layer it again, and the next layer up. And so all those three-dimensional etchings and stone lithographs that you see, they're done through a whole series of scratches through wax, and it continues to build up. And so Dad did a whole series on that, and my brother and I were oftentimes extras in paintings. This is me looking much cooler than I actually was. Rattling up deer in high school for a friend of mine, Ragsdale there. And then, his work continued to progress as well, underwater scenes, even more vivid turkey scenes. His colors and his skies got even more sharp and vibrant. This is some of his later work. Stalking and, a neat photo of a school of redfish over off the island. And as his work continued, he wanted to really kind of show how much he enjoyed the outdoors. And so, Herb's art, this is a little quote out of this book that Texas A&M Press put out from us. Herb's art came from his love for the outdoors. He worked in watercolors and etchings to reproduce the artistry of what God showed him in the field. One of the books written on Herb by author Michael McIntosh probably tells it the best. It's a peculiar fact of sporting art that it cannot be successfully faked. A sporting scene, if it inspires to any degree of acceptance, must not only reflect genuine experience on the artist's part, but must also evoke the memory and feeling of a similar experience in the viewer. In Booth's art, the sense of authenticity and depth of personal experience are instantly recognizable. And that's what Dad poured into those paintings. Ever since he was a little kid, hunting with his best buddy down the street, Paul Bacon, in Colorado, because he couldn't stay out of the field and he could not paint. He wanted to recreate those scenes. And so many people invested into him in becoming an artist, his scoutmaster all the way through his wife and then Meredith Wong, and everybody invested into him in order to help him become the artist he was able to become. And so Dad found opportunities to invest in others. You guys may know Chance Yarborough. There was a couple of artists that Dad invested into late in his life. Dad met Chance right here in Rockport at the fly fishing shop. And Chance was incredibly similar to her in that he had a natural gift, but could not figure out how to make a living out of being an artist, and needed somebody to grow him and mentor him and mature him. And so Dad did much the same with Chance as those Indian artists did with him when he was a kid. Took him into his home, and Chance spent many, many weeks at our house and spent time with Dad learning the craft. And now Chance is becoming his own famous artist here in the Texas coast, and it's love to see that tradition continue here. This particular painting, as you see a lot of similarities in Dad's work, this particular painting here, he did this the year after Dad died, and that's her quail hunting with one of his favorite dogs, Donald. And so for any of you that know Dad, you knew Dad that loved bird dogs. And they were a big part of our life. Funny story how that came about is that when we first came to Texas, and Dad was getting into the Texas sporting scene, quail hunting was like, okay, how does this work? And I've heard stories about it. And so we got an invite to go hunt on McAllen Ranch with Jim McAllen, and because Meredith knew McAllen, and Dad showed up, and McAllen told him over the phone, he's like, bring a dog. I'm like, oh, okay. So he had a Labrador. And so Dad goes down, and he says, meet me at sunup at the Caballero's house, and I'll tell you where to go. All right, so he shows up. McAllen sees him, he's messing with all his cowboys, like, oh, hey, Herb, go to, and gives him directions, go to this field, past the second gate, anywhere inside that fence you can hunt. Hunt there in the morning, come back at lunch, we'll talk about how it went. So Dad goes down there, throws out his bird dog, and then this poor Labrador is like, what am I doing? And they wander around all morning looking for birds out in this field. There's probably a couple thousand acres in this big pasture. And he comes back at lunch, he's saying, Mr. McAllen, I hate to tell you, but is there another place we can hunt this afternoon? It's like, why? It's like, there aren't any quail in that field. And so McAllen just laughed and says, tell you what, after lunch we'll go back and I'll show you what we're talking about. And so he takes out one of his dogs named Tina, who was a German Short-haired Pointer. And Tina and Jim McAllen and Herb went back to the exact same field that afternoon and found 20 coyotes. And Dad was locked in, quail hunting was now the thing, and Tina was the cat's meow. And so the very next year, Tina had a puppy, a litter of puppies, and we got one of those puppies, and we called her Chica. And Chica actually became the mother of our entire bloodline. And we have been, Dad and I progressed that bloodline. We ended up mixing it in with John Rabidou's bloodline, the super famous bird dog trainer, bird dog Hall of Fame trainer actually. The mix of those McAllen tough as nails dogs and then Rabidou's absolutely beautiful field trial dogs, that became our bloodline of dogs. And we've been hunting that same bloodline now for over 40 years. I still have them today. And this is that same line, that dog that Dad was hunting with and Chance is painting, that's Donald down there. It's actually Donald sleeping on the couch. There's a recent photo this week. And Dad and I spent tons of time, that's actually Shoto, there's one of Chica's puppies. It was something that he invested in and spent a lot of time in. Actually, I had the opportunity to go hunt on Kevin Doty's place down in the Jones Ranch, which is the historically the Painted Horse Desert down there. And Kevin called and said, "Hey, I'm hosting this editor from Sports Afield, and I want to show him a good time. Can you come down and run the Herb Booth dogs? You know, I need to be a little famous." I'm like, "Oh, okay, sure." So I go down there, and he's supposed to be writing an article on a new Italian shotgun that he was, publishing in the Sports Afield and in the magazine. And he ended up not liking the shotgun, but loving the dogs. And so the whole article was about hunting with Herb Booth's dogs out there in the Painted Horse Desert. And I said, "Aren't you going to get in trouble about not writing about the gun?" He's like, "No, I don't like the gun anyway." So Dad's dogs actually have a lot of history, of course, for me, and a lot of people remember Dad, for his dogs and his love of quail hunting. He also loved his grandkids, and he loved his wife, and he spent a tremendous amount of time with the grandkids, taking them hunting and fishing. These are turkeys, by the way, that we picked and sent back to the Kisharis, right? And this is one of his other grandsons fly fishing up in Colorado, where Dad grew up fly fishing too. It's one of my brother's sons. When Dad died in December 2014, and then Mom passed a month later in January. And a medical examiner explained it as a broken heart. There was no other health conditions. They had met 52 years earlier on a blind date and were together their entire lives after that. And in their wills, they asked for their ashes to be spread along the St. Joe Island there across Aransas Bay. So we did. We spread their ashes in the same place. And it's right there where, it's actually Paulsmont, for those that know. And we've actually, Don Douglas and Herb actually maintained a duck line there for decades. I still maintain it today. And we spread those ashes, and the very next winter, through the efforts, of course, of all the wildlife conservation and Parks and Wildlife, 2 whooping cranes decided to make a home right there at Paulsmont. And they'd never been there before, and I've been hunting there all my life. And they've been there every winter since. They'll be there in a few weeks, and I go back and visit them all the time. And so my brother and I, we like to think it's Mom and Dad, right? Of course it's not. But it's a neat story of the work of all the wildlife conservation and all the beautiful outdoor, and then of course lifelong mates that stay together, staying right there where Mom and Dad's favorite place was. This is others that he invested into of his grandkids. This is my wife, Amy, whom after I dated her in college, and after Dad met her, he said, "If you don't marry her, I'm going to move to Utah and figure out a way to marry her myself." And so I ended up wising up and getting married to Amy. These are our kids. This is my daughter, Allison, who's going to law school up in GW to study international immigration. She's actually countering human trafficking. This is my son, Ryan, and there's a fly rod. The Save the Cedar Bayou fly rod. This is this summer. I was guiding him over Fence Lake, and we caught that redfish. He's playing football in the Air Force Academy now. I'm going to be a pilot. This is my youngest daughter, Maddie. She's a bit of a crazy one. Probably the smartest out of the group. I don't just say that. The other kids say that. She wants to go into the medical field. And this is my daughter, Catherine. He graduated from A&M, and she is now teaching art up in Dallas. And so, for some of y'all that know the story, when Dad passed, it was sudden. He died in a car accident. He had quite a few different paintings that were in progress. And the other young artist that Herb invested into was Catherine. And so Catherine had spent years learning parts of the trade from Herb. And he, when he passed, we went up into the studio and we saw all kinds of, partially finished pieces up in the studio. And Catherine committed to finishing some of those. And so these are some of those here. This is Mills Wharf that you were talking about earlier. Ellen Diane Johnson had commissioned that from Dad, and she finished that. It was just sort of a sketch, and there were photographs all laying around of Al's family, actually, in all these old cars, and Catherine finished that. This is, an egret flying over water for our dear friends, our neighbors, the Houstons, that live next door to us down here in Rockport. We still have the house that I grew up in. This is actually an interesting painting. That's a field trout scene, and bird dog field trout scene, and that was the final in a series of all the different Bird Dog Hall of Fame chapters in the country had commissioned her to do a painting for their local chapter, and he had finished all of them except the last one. And so Katie picked that one up and finished that painting, and it just about killed her. Because you can't see it real well, you can come by and look at it later, but it's got like 60 horses in there, and all those people, and there's a dog on point there that won the field trial and all that. So the interesting part about that painting is that Catherine was laboring away up in the studio and could not figure out how to finish the grass. The grass was the hardest part for her, because there is no one color in grass, and there's all these dimensions in grass, and she's like, I can't figure it out. So actually we called Steve. Steve Russell came out to the house and took the painting off the easel and says, "Oh, you gotta wash it." And so he grabs a hose, and he starts squirting on it. And Katie goes, "What the hell are you doing that? What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, you gotta do that in order to create dimension." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so Steve actually helped Catherine finish that painting. So thank you, Steve. That was a beautiful gift. This particular painting here was actually on the easel, and you see is actually his easel with the paint in the background. And she actually left that one on the easel until he finished. And back to that story that Michael McIntosh wrote about is you can't fake authenticity of the scene. And so when this, all that existed of this scene was the background trees and a blank area and a curve like that, a pencil sketch of this dog heading the wrong way, or back, and then a little sketch of where this duck blind is. And Katie immediately knew, because she'd grown up hunting with Grandpa. She immediately knew what the scene was supposed to be. It was a surprise. It was, they shot a duck, the dog was coming back. It happened to us 100 times before. And another little flock of mallards comes swooping around that curve. And so she called it surprise mallards. And so, it's a G play that we have now today. Beautiful painting. There's nice, memorial to Dad and putting together hunting scenes like that. This is a photo of one of Mom and Dad's absolute favorites. This is actually on the steps of the Fulton Mansion. This is many years ago, actually. You can see the kids are all pretty little. I already told you about my kids. These are Peter's kids. Great boys, Albert, Anthony, and Owen, that are all growing up in the same deserts and hills in Colorado that Dad grew up in. And so Peter lives out there in Colorado, and they're getting to grow up in those scenes. Mom invested tremendously into this community as well, through Castaways and through her church. And over the decades that they lived here, and all the people that invested into them and the ways that they continue to invest back in the community. It was interesting how Dad associated with the local art community here. My brother, who is a PhD historian, he would often get frustrated with Dad because he called himself the CCC. And Dad, and Peter, over the years, we kind of put up, Dad always said lots of things, right? And we didn't know what he meant by half of it. And finally, later on, Peter finally said, "Dad, I gotta stop you. The the CCC was in the 30s. It was a work corps program. You weren't even born yet. I said, well, why are you calling yourself the CCC? And he said, oh, not that CCC, the new CCC. I was like, well, what is that? It's the colorful coastal characters. So Dad always thought of himself, and Herb and Sandy is a part of the CCC here in Rockport in this community. And I'm so thrilled that you guys are putting this program together and all this history and these books that are coming out, and hoping that the tradition continues with the next generation of artists and think people like Chance and my daughter and others. And appreciate you guys having me out today.
Good.
Thank you, Jim.
May I say a couple words?
Of course.
That was an excellent presentation, and you could talk for months and months about her and never repeat stories. But one is when you were talking about the beginning, is your grandfather and grandmother on Herb's side met. Well, I'm assuming they met, but they were on a round-the-world cruise in 1928 and 29. And it was a university affair, so there was some wonderful photographs in a shoebox that I'm sure you still have the treasure. But it was Mom, Herb's mom and dad in judburs and those safari hats, you know. They'd be in different places in Venice, you know, in Piazza San Marco. But they were at King Tut's tomb right at the time it was being opened by Mr. Carter. So they were in the Valley of the Kings, and so it was all these historic places from around the world, and there's those two standing in front. And the idea was that he was coming home to take over eventually the newspaper business. But we all know what happened in 1929, which doused all that.
Right.
So he still stayed in the business, but the empire kind of melted, you might say. So the way family history can swing on a pivot on some of the darndest things. And when you mentioned that, I've got to throw it in, but the flagpole is that Herb used to, well, he bought a few flagpoles that he didn't want Sandy to know about because it was a pretty extravagant investment. And Sandy knew he liked to fish, but not that much. So he would hide his pole over at Ken Calloway's house. And when they were going fishing, fly fishing, both of them, Ken would bring Herb's good, new, expensive flagpole with him. Well, one night we went over to Fence Lake in your airboat, which you had at the time, very powerful one. And the spotlight went out, and I had gone over in my boat, and so we took my spotlight and put it on Herb's boat, and we went back in there in the dark, and Calloway was standing up lighting the way, and Herb was anyway, all of a sudden the light went out, and we were almost beat to death with something in the dark. Well, what happened is the cord from that spotlight got hung up in the fan of that, and it jerked the wire out of the handle and was slinging the thing around, and Herb was trying to shut the boat down. We had whelps all over. And so I was cussing because that's my spotlight, you know. His was already broke, and now mine, and I don't know how we're going to get home. But what really hurt was Herb's brand new, well, it wasn't brand new at the time, it was fairly new, expensive flagpole got sucked into that same fan and sucked out about 5 feet, which rendered it absolutely useless. But it was one of those, he had to shed a tear, but do it in private. Anyway, lots and lots of very humorous things, but such a wonderful man, and very giving back to the community and to his family, friends. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that at the beginning.
Can I ask you something? You said you were with Ken Calloway. Is that the same guy? I guess we're talking about.
Yeah,
What
he
kind
passed
of,
away a few years ago.
what kind of guy was he?
He came from Lubbock or West Texas in the insurance business, and opened up Cleaners. Cleaners business here. Right there behind the real estate office on 35.
Yeah,
And he had a son named Ken who's now moved away.
Because I got a call the other day, I kind of flipped awkward, I had a call from them asking me if I was interested in some of their artwork.
It's probably from Ken Jr.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
If y'all would go to our Facebook page, the History Center for Aransas County, we're excited to share with you that the Texas Country Reporter interviewed and spent time with Steve Russell. And I got the link on it this morning, so it's a really good one, thank you.
is that on today at 5 o'clock
This morning at 5:30.
this morning?
Yes, and it was just, 'cause I saw that, and I went to look for it, it was on yesterday and then today, but today was at 5:30 this morning. I don't know. And then
Probably
they
see
showed-
something about that. I want to see that.
calls all day from people around the state that it was at a more decent hour in Dallas or.
Probably on
That's right.
YouTube. I bet it's on YouTube.
That's why I put it on. But in the new art book comes out, there's a whole big chapter on those sporting artists and how they helped conserve our resources because they were being overused, overfished by commercial fishermen at the time. And so they went to Austin and met with the governor and signed into law because he was from the Panhandle. He didn't know the problems they were having here. And James Richard Fox had a lot to do with that too. So anyway, we're just learning so much.
What, I mean, do you, I know he did so many works, but I mean, do you consider, what are the top three that you think, in your opinion, that your dad did? Or can you narrow it down to three?
I can't. I really can't, what the question was, if you couldn't hear, is, top 2 or 3 Dad's paintings. I really can't.
I know it's hard.
That's like trying to pick a favorite.
Oh, you got a couple?
Yeah, see,
May I one more time? This is appropriate here. Now, to talk about how big Herb hit it all over the United States, Canada, England, there's the Canadian Ducks Unlimited, and there was a very large book that had one for sure, maybe more of his paintings the book was very large. And you had to wear gloves to even look at it. It was an extremely rare book. And he told me when it happened that Prince Charles and Lady Diana at the time had invited him to come to have high tea in Sandhurst or someplace over there. And I said, well, you're not going, are you? And he said, well, hell yes. Meanwhile, Lady Diana ended up going her way. So anyway, there was one of his paintings that probably raised more money over a period of years than any other painting anyone's done, as far as I know. And it's called Driftwood Blind. It was a tie letter. And he used that idea several times, but around creek mouth and river mouth and all that, you have all that driftwood that
Yep.
is just a natural hiding place. You can throw some decoys out. So the Ducks Unlimited, National Ducks Unlimited, which Herb was one of at any rate, the National DU chairman, one of their people. They never wrote him a letter even thanking him for all the things that came, the wonderful things from that one image. So they used it again here and there. And one Christmas, they were going to do a mail out of smaller prints, and that was going to be one of them, along with several others, as an offering. And the national mail out is hideously expensive. And someone wrote a letter to her saying, here is a letter for you to sign, giving us permission to use this again. And it wasn't, would you mind, or pretty please, or anything. So he wadded the letter up and threw it away. And some months went by, and then there was a phone call from a young man. And he said, Mr. Booth, you forgot to send us that release form. And Herb said, who are you? And the guy named, and he said, how old are you anyway? And the guy was 24. And he said, well, for what is about to happen to you, I'm truly sorry. But he unloaded on this guy, you know, like, I didn't forget to do it, as you didn't ask me to, and you people have just used me for a doormat, and, you know, the spirit of the message was. And the guy said, can we get back to you? So, a little while later, that same morning, the chairman of the national DU called Herb, and that's kind of like communicating with the deity then. He said, hey Herb, how are you? I said, you kind of have us over a barrel, don't you? It's like they've already done this mail out and all that, and spent all this money, and Herb said, of course I'll be glad to sign it, but don't take me for, you know, just as one of your whipping boys. But he did it as a gentleman, you know, but the idea was he'd been jerked around by him, and he had had enough, and so you just keep on letting them do it without getting forever. But that kind of.
I actually have a copy of that book at the house, and it's like 3 foot by 4 foot. It's a massive book, and it takes 2 hands to turn each page, and yeah. I mean, we don't take it out very often, right?
Okay, I'm not through yet. There was a lot of many heavy hitters in that book, and Herb numbered in their number. But every once in a while, once I got up to the league where they would do these prints, and they'd invite you to come somewhere under orders almost to have you sign like an edition of 1,800 prints. So you got to sign your name 1,800 times. And then usually some more to go. But I won't get into it. But anyway, you do a lot of signing. And I had been with him and Jack Cowan and Barnes one time. We made a trip to Houston, all of us together, and it was my first outing rubbing elbows with these guys. And so we were signing prints up there. And they made coffee and refreshments and had people numbering them for us and treated us really first class. So I thought they all did that. Well, they didn't. And I was telling Herb that they wanted me to go somewhere, and I didn't even have gas money to get there, much less room and all that. He said, don't go. Herb, you know, I want this deal. But he said, they put me in a warehouse that has those ribbons hanging down and an egg carton and several boxes, and had me sign all of them sitting in this cold environment and nobody to help him. And when Herb usually waited for the last minute to send his submission in to be printed, he was notorious for doing that. Another story. But at any rate, one of the ducks had too much highlight in the eye, he thought, and in this print, so he would sign his name, Herb Booth, and he'd reach up and he'd with his pencil, he'd scrub out a little bit of that highlight. Then they go to the next one, Herb Booth, don't forget the eye. So that now stopped.
Jim, you can tell your daughter, Kate, about, you know, your grass story. Steve was over at the house last month, and I got a Cowan original laying down there, and he looked at the grass. It's a quail hunting scene.
Yeah.
And he goes, you know, then you go into how you paint grass. So tell your daughter, he's still
teaching people how to paint grass, right?
Yeah.
If y'all need a grass man, I'm ready.
You go to Colorado or go to Steve?
I run a weed eater.
Well, thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you, Joe.
Don't forget to pick up a membership brochure if you'd like to, buy a book, or
I don't know what you're talking
if you want to donate today.
Thanks, Steve.